inshallah. Okay, we are live, inshallah. I'll give a brief introduction, and then Brother Amin, inshallah, you can start with your recitation. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Inshallah, you all are well, and we thank all of you who are attending the program tonight. As you all know, we received the unfortunate news earlier this week that Hajj Mirza Hassan Vaez, the son of Muhammad Ali, had returned to Allah. This was in Yazd, Iran, I believe. And Hajj was the father of our community member, Sister Mahbube Vaez, and the father-in-law of Brother Reza Al-Ghiband. So inshallah, this program is a remembrance program for him. And before we begin, inshallah, I will give a rundown of the schedule. Inshallah, we will have some short verses recited by Brother Ramin, followed by poetry recitation by Brother Nuruddin, followed by a Surah Yasin dedicated to Hajj Mirza Hassan Vaez by Brother Munawwar Yusufali, and then Sheikh speech, inshallah. And then followed by that, we'll have just some few words by his family. So inshallah, without further ado, Brother Ramin, if you can go ahead and begin your recitation, and I will pull up the slides, inshallah. Surah Baqarah.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فاذكروني أذكركم واشكروا لي ولا تكفرون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا استعينوا بالصبر والصلاة. يا أيها الذين آمنوا استعينوا بالصبر والصلاة. إن الله مع الصابرين. ولا تقولوا لمن يقتل في سبيل الله أموات بل أحياء ولكن لا تشعرون. ولا تقولوا لمن يقتل في سبيل الله أموات بل أحياء ولكن لا تشعرون. ولنبلونكم بشيء من الخوف والجوع ونقص رأس من الأموال والأنفس ولنبلونكم بشيء من الخوف والجوع ونقص من الأموال والأنفس والثمرات وبشر الصابرين الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة قالوا إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Hassan, Brother Ramin, thank you for reciting that in memory and dedicated to Hajj Mirza Hassan Vaez. Inshallah, next we will have Brother Nuruddin recite some poetry for this occasion. So one thing I forgot to remind everyone is in between, whenever you can, if you can recite a Surah Al-Fatiha for his soul, inshallah. So inshallah, before Nuruddin begins, if we can all recite a Surah Al-Fatiha ma'a salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا رحمن يا رحيم اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجه لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل وقائدا فناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين تا گریه بر حسین تمنای خلقت است، بین من و تمام ملائک رقابت است. نزدیک می کنند دل ما را به هم حسین، این اشک روزه نیست که عقد اخوت است. گفت تو اشک غم حسین را پاک مکن، بگذار که این اشک تو را پاک کنه. آقا جان یا سفینة النجات، پیدا شدیم هرچه در این راه گم شدیم، یعنی فقط حسین چراغ هدایت است. قرآن و منبر و دو سه خط روزه اتش، ساعت خوب هفته همین چند ساعت است. حالا که بغض بسته به من راه حرف را، مقتل بخوام که موقع ذکر مصیبت است. بی مقدمه برم کربلا عرض ادب کنی، میگه افتاده بود روی زمین زیر دست و پا. شعرم تمام می شود اینجا، روایت است که چون تنگ شد بر او میدان، فتاد از حرکت ذوالجناح از جولان. نه ذوالجناح دگر تا به استقامت داد، نه سید الشهدا بر جدال طاقت داد. گفت حواس باد مخالف چو قیرگون گردید، عزیز فاطمه از اسب سرنگون گردید. می نویسه فانقلبت فرسه، آقای ما از روی مرکب زمین خورد. بلند مرتب شاهی ز صدر زین افتاد، اگر غلط نکنم عرش بر زمین افتاد. حسین جان، حسین جان، حسین جان، روزه نمیخواهد تنی که سر ندارد، قربان آن آقا که انگشتر ندارد. اومدن انگشتر آقا رو حمایت کردن. درباره انگشتر یه چیز دیگه یادم آمد. روایت داره هیچ جایی در بدن ابی عبدالله به اندازه انگشترم سالم نبود. صلی الله علیک یا ابا عبدالله، صلی الله علیک یا ابا عبدالله، و علی الارواح التي حلت بفنائک علیک منی سلام الله ابدا ما بقیت و بقی اللیل و النهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد منی لزیارتکم. السلام علی الحسین و علی علی ابن الحسین و علی اولاد الحسین و علی اصحاب الحسین و علی ابی الفضل العباس الحسين السلام عليكم جميعا يا أهل بيت النبوة جميعا برحمة الله وبركاته.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم. Hassan, thank you, Brother Nuruddin, for that very deep and heartfelt recitation in memory of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. Inshallah, next I will ask Brother Munawwar usefully to recite Surah Yasin. And again, before we proceed to that, if we can all recite in between that a Surah al-Fatiha ma'as salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالأرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشاء نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم أن لا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننقصه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وظللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحيي الذي أنشأ أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون آمنا بالله وصدق الله العلي العظيم الفاتحة مع الصلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Ahsan, thank you, Brother Munawar, for reciting Surah Yasin. Inshallah, next we will have Sheikh Jafar's speech. And as a reminder, inshallah, after Sheikh Jafar, we will have some words from the family of Hajj Hassan Vaez. So inshallah, Sheikh, without further ado, Bismillah.
الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم به نستعين. الحمد لله الذي جعل الحمد مفتاحا لذكري وسببا للمزيد من فضله ودليلا على آلائه وعظمته ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين أرواحنا له فداء. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وقضى ربك ألا تعبدوا إلا إياه وبالوالدين إحسانا إما يبلغن عندك الكبر أحدهما أو كلاهما فلا تقل لهما أف ولا تنهرهما وقل لهما قولا كريما واخفض لهما جناح الذل من الرحمة وقل رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. First and foremost, I give my condolences for the loss of Hajj Mirza Hassan Vaez. My condolences go out to his daughter, our beloved community member, Sister Mahbooba, and to his father and to his son-in-law, Brother Riza Alagiban, and the rest of the family as well. Hajj Mirza Hassan Vaez was like a member of our own community. He would often come and he would often visit Austin, Texas, the IABA community. Just to give you a little bit about him, because we would often talk, I would quite often look forward to his visit when he would come to Austin. Of course, Hajj Hassan Vaez, he was the son of a sheikh, of a scholar. His father was a scholar, Sheikh Muhammad Ali Vaez. His grandfather was a scholar, actually a mujtahid, Ayatollah Muhammad Hussein Vaez. And to some extent, I would say that also Hajj Hassan Vaez himself, he was a sheikh also in his own rights. He also studied some years in the Hausa, about 2 years in the Hausa. And often when we would sit and we would talk, our talks sometimes would be brief, but they will be full of meaning. And we would discuss things from the Quran, different understandings of the Quran, the hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalus salam, the dua of Imam of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalus salam. So he had a very good grounding in his understanding of his deen. He also mentioned to me once that, I believe from his mother's side, and his family can correct this as well, that there's a familiar relationship, there's a family relationship with one of the very well-known scholars and mujtahideen of the Hausa of Najaf, and that is Muhammad Kazim Tabatabai Yazdi. So Ayatollah Yazdi, just to give you a little bit about him, to show you that, and this is one thing that I was very impressed with Hajj Hassan Vaez, that he has this family relationship, because it shows that his family was one that was very grounded in their faith. So this relationship, which I believe he told me came from his mother's side of Ayatollah Muhammad Kazim Tabatabai Yazdi. Ayatollah Yazdi, he wrote a book in Islamic law called Urwatul Wuthqa. Until today, one who studies in the Hausa, especially at the higher levels of the Hausa, Dars al-Kharij, on their path to become a mujtahid, they are constantly reading this book, and actually this book serves as one of the platforms for the Dars al-Kharij. So in any case, he came from a very grounded family, that in his youth, as I understand, he was a religious person, but he decided to take up the track of doing business like his father was. His father was a sheikh and also doing business as well. So he tried to just focus, after his 2 years of Hausa studies, focus on business. But what I captured, or what I understood from his interaction least with me and with others as well, he was someone that was very aware and conscious of the state of his deen and his connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we examine this and analyze this disposition that he had, from what I understand, that it was a means of, again, his own personal development, a personal development that didn't end at the age of 40. Quite often we look at some of the hadith, or we hear some of the lectures about tarbiyah, about development, about rearing, about educating ourselves in our youth. And at one stage, we're left to do whatever we want to do the first 7 years, to a point that we reach to the age of 70. And it's a very famous hadith where, and it's stated that once one reaches the age of 70, then they should take their cane, meaning that their perhaps akhlaq, their habits at that point have become habitual. And for some, they think that, well, this is the end of at least our tarbiyah, or after that, it is difficult. No, one continues to learn, one continues to educate themselves, one continues to develop themselves. And this is one of the things that I understood from interacting with Hajj Mirza Hassan Vaez, that when we spoke about the Quran, different verses of the Quran, when we spoke about the hadith, that again, he was interacting with me, I was picking up some things, learning from him, he would take some things from me as well. Very good discussion. And so I want to discuss this aspect of Islamic development, an aspect that quite often we don't think about, and that is our development in our senior years. Something that kind of goes hand in hand as well with what we call, even in Western concept, of elderly care. How do we take care of our parents? This is what I observed with Hajj Riza Alagiban and his wife, Sister Mahbuba, how they cared for their father or father-in-law, and they would bring him here, they would help him out. And at that age, as we see, when we think of, again, how do we develop? And that's the question, how do we develop after that age of 40? What is our tarbiyah at that point? If we look at the riwayat of Ahlul Bayt, alayhim afdalus salatu wassalam, we see that they give us indications of how to continue to develop ourselves. One of those ways is that, in a very interesting hadith, says, if a person, and by Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, if a person is doubtful whether their parents had did the aqiqah for them, meaning slaughtered a sheep or whatever to give as charity on their behalf. So this is something that's highly recommended as an adult. In fact, it is, according to this narration, says it's more recommended to do that than just to simply make a sacrifice. But make that sacrifice with the intentions that this is the aqiqah that should have been for me when I was born. This is one way of developing after one reaches their senior years. Likewise, the fidya that one pays, if one is not able to fast during the month of Ramadan, then they pay the fidya. This is also something that helps with a person's spiritual development. A third thing that helps with that spiritual development in one's senior years is to remember those things which you perhaps forgot in your earlier years, to learn something that you also forgot. To, if someone has missed their salat or things like that, that person begins to make up those salat and make up those obligations, those duties which they perhaps missed in their youth. Unfortunately, they should not have missed. I interacted with Hajj Vaez. One of the things that I noticed about him was his love for the masjid, his love for coming to the center, his love for being in salat. And perhaps from this, Allahu A'lam, Allah knows best, but from this, perhaps I understood that perhaps he did not miss any salat. So perhaps he didn't miss any salats when he was young, or they were all made up, because he had such a great love just simply to come and to sit in the masjid, to recite Dua Kamel, to recite the Quran, to, again, as I said, discuss about the blessings that we have received from Ahlul Bayt. And this is one of the things that he said to me on many occasions, that we have been greatly blessed to be able to follow the Ahlul Bayt alayhim afsalatu wasalam, to get their guidance and their understanding of the Quran and of the Deen. So with this understood, this is one aspect of a person developing or having this tarbiyah in their senior years. And that is for them to recognize themselves that, okay, well, what is my duty? What is my obligation? What are the things that perhaps I did not learn in my youth and I need to learn now? What are those things that I forgot in my youth that I want to recall and make sure that I am well grounded in those aspects of my deen? The other aspect of a tarbiyah for those who are in their senior lives, it takes on an aspect of how we as children, or how we as perhaps young adults or older adults, take care of those who are more senior than ourselves. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He directs us how to do this in the verse that I recited in the beginning of my lecture, and that is verses 23 and 24 of Surah Isra, so chapter 17 of the Quran, verses 23 and 24. And I'll go into that in a second. But when we think of this idea, this concept of elderly care, it's not something that is often discussed in Islamic circles. Only a few people sometimes they think about this. I remember on one occasion when I went for Muharram in England, there was one of the Muslim brothers, he actually owned an elderly care facility in a senior's home. He owned that. And of course, as we began to talk, we discussed this issue. Most of the people who were in there were not Muslims. Muslims, they mostly look after their parents and their elderly in their own homes or in their homes, and they go to them. Something that also my family as well, we do not put our parents in senior homes. We've always taken care of them. But nonetheless, there's a reality. And this brother, he also spoke about this. He says, yes, perhaps given the way of life, sometimes we may or need to develop something that is completely Islamic. If a person is not able to take care of their parents, or if those parents did not have children. So what do we do with those elderly? Or if there's no one else? In any case, this is a discussion for some other time. But nonetheless, the reality of elderly care is something that we have to think about, and particularly have an Islamic perspective about it. In order to think about that Islamic perspective of elderly care, which is again a part of the tarbiyah of someone who is in their senior years of life, one social worker by the name of Wendy Lusbader, she's a social worker, and she quite often she writes about taking care of those who are elderly, taking care of those who are aged. She has a very interesting statement. She says, giving help eventually embitter us, unless we are compensated at least by appreciation. In other words, taking care of those who are older sometimes it becomes difficult. It becomes difficult. And so she says, for most people, and this is coming from her experience, what she said, it embitters that person unless they feel that they're compensated at least by the appreciation, that the elderly, they are appreciative of the work that their caregivers are doing. And she says, likewise, on the other side, that the elderly person or those who are senior accepting help degrades us unless we are but some like to get help. They rather be independent, and for good reasons, because they knew that for a long period of their lives they were independent. They were able to walk, they were able to get up on their own, they were able to do things for themselves, but now they're in a situation where they have to depend on others. So sometimes it's difficult for them to reach out unless they understand that, oh, this person who's helping me is getting something in return. So with this in mind, if we look at the Islamic perspective of elderly care, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He points out to us in verses 23 and 24 of Surah Al-Isra. Taking care of those who are older than ourselves, our parents, our grandparents, whoever they may be, it has to be with a Tawhidi perspective or Tawhidi outlook. What do I mean by this? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He starts this verse 23 of Surah Al-Isra, He says, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that He has ordained, or He has put forth this ruling or this idea that no one should be worshipped except Himself. And after that, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. And then one must do good and be kind to their parents. Quite often, this verse is recited and reflected upon in light of a child, right? Teenager, or so forth, on and so on, that they must be kind to their parents. But at the same time, yes, when you're in adulthood, you have to be kind to your parents. So this relationship should be based upon Tawheed. In other words, when we are taking care of our parents, when they're elderly, they're not able to take care of themselves, this in itself is ibadah. We should consider it as ibadah. It is like worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because we are, again, obeying the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In many ahadith and many statements, the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, as well as the Ahlul Bayt, Imma alayhi wasalam, they stated placing or putting a smile on the face of a mu'min is a ibadah. And so, of course, if we are taking care of our parents, elderly parents, and making them happy, we are pleasing them, this is like ibadah. It's like worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. He's made it an obligation upon us to show kindness towards our parents. So when they reach to that age of being what we can call in Arabic being sheikh, and there's two terms that are actually used when you speak of someone who are in their senior years, someone who is a sheikh or someone who has reached the age of kibar, someone who's reached an old age. We should understand that their development may be challenged by certain things. One, physically, that when they reach that elderly age, there may be two challenges. One, physical challenge, the other may be a mental or intellectual challenge. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He points to this in the Quran, in Surah Ali Imran, with regards to the physical challenges one may have in their senior years. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to bless Ibrahim with his son Ismail. And when Ibrahim, he receives this news from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, قال ربي أنا يكون لي غلام وقد بلغني الكبر وامرأتي عاقر وقال كذلك الله يفعل. So Ibrahim, he asks, he says that, how is it such that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will bless me with a child? That how He bless me with a child? When قَدْ بَلَغَنِيَ الْكِبَرُ, that when I've reached to this old age, وَامْرَأَتِي آخِرَ, and my wife as well, she's reached to an elderly age and she's barren, she's not able to bear a child. But this is from, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, from the blessing and the ni'mat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah does what He wants. But nonetheless, what the norm is that, yes, as we age, our body changes to the point that we reach this point of kibar. And when we reach this point of kibar, then our bodies don't function the same. Likewise, in Surah An-Nahl, verse 70 of Surah An-Nahl, so chapter 16 of the Quran, verse 70. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He speaks about this process of returning back to Him, He says, Wallahu khalaqakum thumma yatawaffakum wa ومنكم من يرد إلى أرذل العمر لكي لا يعلم بعد علم شيئا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that Allah is the one who has created you, and He is the one who will take your soul and bring you back to Him. He says, and among some of you, that in this process of returning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you will be returned back to a, what do they call it, a state where your kind of your age is digressing, or your state of your mental capacity is digressing. This is what the meaning of aradil al-umar, that you are returning back to a time that when you were before, like when we are children, we don't know anything, and then we come to learn something. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you will return back to that state, some of you, لِكَيْ لَا يَعْلَمَ بَعْدَ عِلْمِ شَيْئًا, to the point that after you have learned, you will not remember. You may have challenges with remembering things, challenges with understanding things. And this is, subhanAllah, very interesting. When I interacted with Hajj Vaez, that his mind was fresh. He remembered things. When we interacted, especially with regards to the Quran and different hadith, perhaps a few times he would say, oh, well, was this hadith in Kafi or was it in Bihara? I would check. I was like, yeah, it's in Kafi, or this was in Bihara. This idea and concept of being a sheikh as well. And there's a difference, according to some of the commentators of hadith. They say a person who's a sheikh, they say it begins from the age of 41 to the rest of your life. Or some say until the age of 80. And after the age of 80, then a person is in a state of kibar, that they are senior, they're elderly, according to some. And so sheikh or sheikhuka from the age of 41, as some said, age of 50 to the rest of your life, but nonetheless, difference between the two. And one of the very interesting things from Imam Baqir alayhi hafizahullah about this concept of sheikhuka and one being in an elderly state. Imam Baqir, he encountered Jabir ibn Abdullah Ansari, one of the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Very famous companion, elderly companion. By the time he reached the age, met with Imam Baqir, and he made this statement to Imam Baqir. He says, أُحِبُّ فِيهَا الشَّيْخُوكَ عَلَى الشَّبَابِ وَالْمَرْضَ عَلَى الصَّحَّةِ وَالْمَوْتِ عَلى الْحَيَاةِ. He told Imam Baqir, he says, I'm at this point that when I've become old, he says, I like my old age, my senior age, over my youth. And the state that I am in, because of course, when you're elderly, your body is not functioning the same way. You may tend to get sick easy. So he says, I like the sickness over my health. And I like death over life. In the commentary of this, one of the scholars stated, this very interesting perspective, that why would Jabir ibn Abdullah Ansari, who was someone who was a companion of Rasulullah, of Amir al-Mu'mineen, of Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, Imam Zain al-Abidin, of course, now Imam Baqir at this stage, of course, he lived to see Imam Ja'far Sadiq as well, but Imam Baqir at this stage, why would he say that, oh, I love this old age over my youth? And this is someone that when we read about his life, that he was someone who was a very avid follower of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afsatu wasalam. Not someone who is swerving this way or that way, but a very avid follower of Ahlul Bayt. So some commentator on this said that in this state of one's development, because a person, on one hand, they have learned, they have gained wisdom in their youth, and now they're pretty much sitting on this wisdom and carrying their spiritual development forward. Another aspect of this was that in this old age, or at this age, a person is not pulled as much by their low desires. That all of that was during their youth, and now they can have a bit more focus on their ibadah. So some say perhaps this is what the intent of Jabir was. Imam Baqir alayhi sallam, on the other hand, he responded to Jabir. He says, "O Jabir, فَإِنْ جَعَلَنِي اللَّهُ شَيْخًا أُحِبُّ الشَّيْخُوكَ وَإِنْ جَعَلَنِي شَابًا أُحِبُّ الشَّيْبُوبَ." He says, "O Jabir," he says, that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes me elderly or grants me a long life, he says, then that's what I would love, to become a sheikh, an elderly person. But if he only makes me young, or when he has made me young, then I love that youthfulness. And if he's made me sick, then I love that sickness. If he's granted me shafa, good health, then I love that cure and that good health from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِنْ أَمَاتَنِي أَحِبُّ الْمَوْتِ وَإِنْ أَبْقَانِي أَحِبُّ الْبَقَاءِ. He says, however, and likewise, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taken my life, then I love that death, which I'm coming in at, transition back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted me life, then I love what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted me. And Jabir, he looked at Imam Baqir alayhi sallam, looked towards Imam Baqir. Of course, Jabir was blind at the time, and he says, I understand why Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he told me that I will meet one of his children who is Baqirul Ilm, the one who splits the hairs of knowledge, who goes into the depths of knowledge. And what is the depth of knowledge that Imam Baqir is going into? Imam Baqir, he's pointing to this aspect of, again, tarbiyah, of our development, whether that development be in our youth or in our elderly age, in our senior years of life, that we must take advantage of that. That if we are young and we're healthy, then we should not take that for granted. We should worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should make sure that we are doing our wajibat, we are abstaining from those things which are haram, so that we develop that habit of staying on the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, staying on the path of Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Develop that habit. So yes, when we reach into our senior years, that we don't have to worry about that. We continue to develop ourselves. If we haven't developed that in our youth, then never think that, oh, well, I don't have enough time. Or I didn't do it then why should I start now? No, start at this moment. That it is never too late to change oneself, to mold oneself in the lifestyle of Muhammad wa al Muhammad, whether they are youthful or they're elderly, whether they have good health or their health is deteriorating, whether they are at the point that even is close to death. There was one incident that happened during the lifetime of Imam Sadiq alayhi wasalam, whereby a group of his followers were traveling to Mecca for Hajj. And on that trip, one of the individuals, his father was with him. His father was elderly. And his father was not among those followers of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim wasallam. His son had embraced Imam Sadiq and realized that Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam was the Imam, was the rightful person to follow in order to gain guidance. But his father had not yet embraced the Ahlul Bayt alayhim wasallam. And in the middle of that trip, before they even reached to Mecca, or actually on their way back from Mecca, because the father, he had fallen ill. Their way back from Mecca to Medina, the father had fallen ill, and they realized that he may not survive. So a group of the companions, they said that to this young man, he says, listen, why don't you tell your father about the Imam, that the Imam is the rightful leader, he's a rightful guide. After Rasulullah, it should have been Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi wasallam, up until this point, up until Imam Sadiq. Some of them said, no, leave him. He's elderly. And at this point, he may not perceive that. He says, and let him stay upon his actions, because, mashallah, he was someone who was a worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was someone who had good akhlaq. He was someone who was, he wasn't someone who oppressed others. He was someone who gave charity. He said that, inshallah, Allah will take these deeds into consideration and account, and inshallah, he will be okay. So as this elderly man, right before he passed away, he opened his eyes because they were chattering around him. They were having this discussion around him. And he heard, he says, that's the path that I'm on. I'm on the path of Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq. And then he took his last breath and he passed away. So these companions of Imam Sadiq, they were like, whoa. In this last moment, just with the last breath, he made the statement. So they weren't sure. That is his testimony to being on the path of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Was that sufficient with his last breath or not? So they went to Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam. They told Imam Sadiq what happened. They said that he was on his deathbed, his last breath, he made that statement. And Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam says, "Walahu Jannah," and he has paradise. And they said, well, this is at the last moment he stated. Imam Sadiq says, what do you want from me? Lahu Jannah. That he understood even at that moment, Lahu Jannah. So as we take care of our parents, we take care of the senior members of our community, the elderly, must be with a Tawheedi perspective, understand that when we are caring for them, this is ibadah. This is like worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because we are obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. And we must, again, when we interact with them, understand that yes, their physical capabilities are not like that when they were youth. Our physical capabilities when we become the senior members of our community will not be the same. Our mental capabilities may not be the same. So therefore, with that Tawheedi perspective, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He teaches us in these verses, that we should speak kindly to them. Speak kindly to them. La takul lahum uffan. Don't say bad things to them. La takul lahum uffan, but rather say to them, qawlan karima. This is a part of that tarbiyah. This is a part of, again, helping them in this latter years of their life. Likewise, we humble ourselves before them. وَخْفِضْ لَهُمُ الْجَنَاحَ, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. He says, وَخْفِضْ لَهُمَا جَنَاحَ الذُّلِّ مِنَ الرَّحْمَةِ, to have mercy upon them and to make dua for them. Say as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He stated in this verse, and this is perhaps a small dua that you can make for them. That, oh Allah, show your mercy to my parents as they have developed me, they have raised me when I was young. But now you may be in a position that, yes, I have to take care of my parents, I have to raise them, or I have to take care of them as me when I was young. And this goes back to one of the stories that one young man, he would carry his mother on his back and he had to feed her. She couldn't walk, but he would carry her around on his back. And when it came time for her to eat, he would have to feed her. And he asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that I do all of these things for my mother. Am I fulfilling the right? Have I fulfilled the rights to her and done as much for her as she did for me? Because there was a point when I was a baby, I was young, and she would feed me, she would carry me. And the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, no. He says, your mother carried you and she would give everything for you. That even if she had to go hungry, she would make sure that you ate when you were a child. And she carried you, and she had that expectation that you will live for a long time. But when you're carrying her and knowing that, well, this is going to end soon, because she's in a stage of her life that it will not remain too much. So that dua we make for our parents, رَبِّ رَحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِ صَغِيرًا. We recognize their tarbiyah for us in our youth, and at the same time, we prepare and we make their tarbiyah in their senior years of life comfortable. Why? By taking certain pressures off of them. by doing those things which they are not able to do at that moment. And if we look to the dua of Imam Zain al-Abidin, alayhi wasalam, another interesting dua that we can read and we can understand that how do we help with the development of our seniors, the seniors in our community or in our family. In that dua, the dua for the parents of Imam Zain al-Abidin, there's a point where the Imam, he says that, oh Allah, make me their companions and their... It's very interesting when we think about this. Make them our companions and friend. And when we look at the tarbiyah of our own children, there's a point where they reach an age where it says that, yes, you should be their companions and you should be their friend. Yes, at one moment you leave them to do what they want to do, and in another moment you begin to guide them, you begin to, again, reprimand them, make sure that they're doing what they're doing. Then at another stage of their life, you become their companions and their friend. You guide them through wisdom and knowledge, and you let them make their choices. You steer them in a direction, but you are their companions. And here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or in this dua of Imam Zain al-Abidin, says that your parents at a point that you should be, yes, their companions and friend. Perhaps in that latter stage of their life, many of their companions, many of their friends may have passed on. And so now you are their companion, you are their friends. You should sit with them, listen to them, talk with them, keep them company. And say to them, qawlan kareeman, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he states. And likewise, in that dua of Imam Zain al-Abidin, one of the more important things that it states is that you pray for your parents. In fact, in that dua of Imam Zain al-Abidin for one's parents, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that allow me to remember my parents after each and every prayer, after each and every salah. The Salatul Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, that we remember them. At the very least, we say, Rabbi irhamhuma kama rabbayani saghira. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send his mercy down upon them. And to remember our parents in this manner after each salat is really not much. When we look at the life of Imam Zain al-Abidin, alayhi wasalam, that for 4 years he cried for his father, Imam Hussein. 40 years. In other words, he continued to his father for the Shuhada of Karbala after that event until his own martyrdom came. So much so to the point that one of the servants of Imam Sadiq, Imam Zain al-Abidin, alayhi wasalam, he came to Imam Zain al-Abidin in the state of huzn, a state of sadness and state of crying. And he asked Imam Zain al-Abidin, he says, Ja'altu fadak ya ibn Rasulullah. He says, may I be a ransom, O son of Rasulullah. Ama an li huznika in yanqadi. He says, will this sadness of yours, will it ever, that for how long will you continue to mourn and cry for your father? Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi wasalam, at that point, he says, Wayhaka. He says, woe be unto you. He says, look at the Prophet Yaqub, Inni Yaqub al-Nabi. He had 12 sons. And one of those sons, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took Qayyib Allahu wahidan minhum. So Allah took one of those sons and simply put him in another place. Simply that son was absent from Yaqub. فَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنْ كَثْرَةِ الْبُكَاءِ. He says, but what did Yaqub do? He says, from crying profusely for this one son who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taken or hidden from the eyes of the Prophet Yaqub, he cried until he went blind. He cried as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, Ya ala Yusuf. Oh, what is the state of Yusuf? He was crying for Yusuf. He says, this was the state of Yaqub while his son was alive. Just simply my state. He says, وَأَنَا نَظَرْتُ إِلَىٰ أَبِي وَأَخِي وَعَمِّي وَسَبْعَةَ عَشَرَ رَجُلًا مِنْ أَهْلِ بَيْتِي. He says, what do you think is my state? That when I saw the state of my father on the day of Ashura, on the land of Karbala, that what happened to my father? How he was left alone with no companions, with no family. He says, how would you think and expect my state to be, my mourning to be, when I lost my brother in Karbala, Ali al-Akbar, also Ali al-Asghar, wa ammi Abu al-Fadl Abbas, that what is my state when these folks and 17 men from among my family, Qasim, Muhammad Aoun, that they were from Ahl Bayti Maqtulin Hawli. فَكَيْفَ يَنْقَضِي حُزْنِي. He says, how is it that my sadness and my mourning would stop when they were killed around me? When I experienced that sad moment of them departing. This was the state of Imam Zain al-Abidin, that when he wept for his father, Imam Hussein. But as well, there was another member of Ahlul Bayt that wept for a father, and that weeping for the father was a painful weeping for the father. And this was the state of Fatima Zahra, that how she wept for her father, Rasulullah. In one beautiful poem, it's in Farsi, it states, Sukhte qalbi Ali Murtada, the heart of Ali, it was painful and heavy. Hazrat Zahra shud sahib aza. Why was the heart of Imam Ali so heavy? This is because Fatima Zahra, she has now become sahib aza. She is the one who is mourning. Hazrat Zahra shud صاحب عزا بر پدر و بر حسن و بر رضا اجرک الله بقیت الله پیکر پاک خاتم المرسلین مانده میان هجر روی زمین جان محمد شده خانه نشین اجرکم الله بقیت الله خون شده از غم جگر فاطمه رفته ز دنیا پدر فاطمه رخت عزا شد ببر فاطمه اجرکم الله بقیت الله غریب خانه در وطن کشته شد بگو امام منتحن کشته شد یوسف فاطمه حسن کشته شد اجرکم الله بقیت الله. Fatima, she mourned the death of her father, but of course as this poem it also states that Fatima, she would mourn the martyrdom of Imam Hassan. She would mourn the martyrdom of Imam Hussein as well before they were even martyred. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا وأي منقلب ينقلبون. اللهم اغفر ذنوبنا واستر عيوبنا واقضي حوائجنا واشفي مرضانا وبالخصوص Hajj Mirza Hassan al-Vaez وعجل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان واجعلنا من أعوانه وأنصاره والمستشيرين بين يديه وتحت لواء بحق محمد وآله الطاهرين. Allah, forgive our sins and cover our shortcomings, grant us our needs, cure those who are ill among our friends and family members, and forgive and shed mercy upon our deceased ones, those who have passed along before us, and particularly Hajj Mirza Hassan Vaez. And Allah, hasten the reappearance of Imam Zaman, make us among his helpers, his companions, and those who sacrifice their lives for him. Wa akhiru da'wana, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Sheikh. Inshallah, we'll have at the end some few words from Brother Mahdi Vaez. So, Brother Mahdi, please, inshallah, go ahead.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, everybody, for participating in this ceremony. I really appreciate everyone's attendance and your thought and prayers. I would like to thank Brother Muhammad for moderating and setting up this meeting. Also, Nuruddin Buzari, Nabar, Yusuf Ali, and others who did something in this program, recited Quran, and especially Brother Sheikh Jafar Muhammad for the nice sermon that he did. And thank you. So I'm gonna just in a couple of minutes probably go through some of the things about my father, maybe that helps and make some people understand where he was coming from. One thing that I want to mention about him was the type of person that he was, and in the province of Yazd, that many people knew him because he was into rock business, into bazaar, and then afterwards he became involved into agriculture. So in both businesses, he was very successful and also helped a lot of people. I just mentioned briefly about his business model when he was doing the rock business, because I was a child at the time and I really appreciated what he was doing at that time, but then became more appreciative after I grew up and saw the whole community and the whole society, and seeing that not many people really care about other people, and how much he really did care about others. So the business model that he had was to help the poor at that time, because many people didn't really have a lot of money to live a good life, especially people in the rural area of Yazd and other provinces. And I'm talking about the years between 1963 until 1979, 80, and beyond. So what he was doing was that he gave the poor people free materials for rugs and helped them set that up. And the guys worked at the farm, but the ladies at home really were doing the rug, weaving the rugs, and takes them probably around 1 year to complete this process. But my father just gave him all the time they needed, usually 1 year, for them to complete this thing and bring it to the city. And then he sold it. At the time, not many of the sales were in cash, so it was sold with credit. But my father gave those people cash because they needed it, and after deducting the material bill from that price. So one thing about my father was that he never charged any extra. Whatever it was the year before, whatever was the bill, he just charged them without even one penny of interest or anything, because my father was also very religious in that aspects, and didn't believe in those type of stuff. So I remember that he was having almost 1,200 customers in those three provinces, and years later, I met some people who asked my family name, and when I said Vaez, they said, "Oh, do you know Hassan Vaez?" I said, "That's my father." And they said, "Oh, he was a very nice guy. He did help a lot of people in those areas." So I'm very glad about my father doing this, and just thought this is the best time to mention it and tell everyone, and those in the new generation, that there are ways we could help other people while doing business. And there are other ways too, but this is one thing that my father was doing. Other things that he did, I mean, he was a role model for me, at least as this child, because he provided me with whatever I needed, and mostly the guidance and telling me what to do, what not to do, respecting me, respecting my opinions, respecting what I wanted to achieve in life. So I really appreciate that. And I just briefly mentioned a little list that I have prepared about what things that he was doing, the good of the person that he was. And I just prepared this thing, prepared it very in short time because I didn't know about this program that I was going to be speaking or doing something. But I thought it helps others to understand a little bit about him as well. So he was really helping other people in the way that I mentioned and other ways. Anybody who knocked on the door of his house, there were a lot of people coming. He never turned anybody down. He went and whatever he had at home, he gave it to them. It was his nature. He couldn't just not. He couldn't say no. I don't have anything. Sorry. And his help was really big. It wasn't just like small amount, but whatever he had, he helped. And sometimes he even borrowed money and helped. He was a generous man, not only in the house. It was everybody who knows him, he knows he was a giving person. He was also very forgiving. He had a good attitude that if anybody did something to him, said something to him, he never held grudges against them. He just was very forgiving. And that's why everybody really loved him. Everybody really liked him. I know people who sent me condolences messages who really we had never heard from them and had done something bad at some point to him or something. But now they were very sorry because he never harmed anybody. He was always happy. He always smiled. Those people, brothers, sisters, who were at this masjid in Austin, whenever he came every year, he was here. He was always smiling. He was always saying good things. He was always saying positive things. He always saw everything like the glass, the full half of the glass, and not the empty one. He always told me about being positive. He always told me about taking care of myself. He was very caring. He loved other people, even animals, anything. I mean, anything. I don't think he ever hurt even a small roach or anything like that. He was a very sociable person. People who know him, they're all sorry about his demise. I mean, I've got phone calls from people who said how good he was, even at age 80 or so. He was talking to everybody like he was their age, even children or youth or mid-age people, whatever. Everybody said that they enjoyed talking to him, and he always liked talking to them. He was a very good man as far as the religious concern. He was just keeping things to himself, but he loved to recite Quran. He loved to recite Dua. Anywhere he went, he always went to the mosque. Whether he was here in Texas visiting or he was in Yazd, he always went to the mosque and recited Quran, and he had a good voice. And at some point, when his father also had some sessions, Quran sessions in their home every week, he always was there, and he was also participating. And he was very much his role model was Hazrat Abul Faz, and he always was calling upon him, and loved him very much. And one thing that I should mention that he had sore foot due to diabetes for more than 25 years. But he told me once that I asked Hazrat Abul Faz to cure me, and and thank God he didn't really die due to diabetes or sore foot or any other thing, because as some of you may know, he had two cancer. Like he had the kidney cancer and he had the prostate cancer, so he didn't really die because of all these cancers or diabetes or the food, or just because he believed in Hazrat Abul Faz. He was a very peaceful and very patient man. I mean, he called me even before before he died. Every day almost we talked because of the COVID. He was always telling me to be patient, everything will work out, to be taking care of myself. He was very kind, very kind. And the last thing that I want to mention, that he wasn't really complaining about anything. Even if he was in extreme pain, he wouldn't complain. He never asked anybody for help unless he really, really needed help. So anybody who asked him how he was doing, even in hospital bed, he said, "I'm doing fine. I'm okay. Nothing is wrong with me, even if you had cancer." So I can't really say more because the more I go on, the more I think about what the good qualities he had. So I'm going to finish this with the poems, a very small poem. I don't know who did this or who was the poet of this, but it is very nice. I read it in Farsi and then I translate it to English, but my own way of translation very quickly. So I would read that to you. پنهان به خاک گشت و قد رسای تو، غمگین مباش در دل ما هست جای تو. از مرگ ناگهانیت ای نازنین پدر، بیگانه سوخت تا چه رسد آشنای تو. Though your body was buried with grace, you have in our heart a special place. When heard about your demise, my beloved father, strangers became sad, but those knowing you sadder. Thank you very much, and I really, again, appreciate on behalf of myself, on behalf of my family, on behalf of everybody else who thinks he's also in mourning. I would really like to thank everybody for participating, and I wish all your loved ones who are in heaven be in good hands, and I would ask everybody to recite the Surah of Fatiha for everybody who died. Thank you very much.
Hassan, thank you, Brother Bhakti, for sharing tremendous words by your father. And inshallah, may Allah elevate his status and his ranks in heaven.
Thank you.
When you speak about it, it speaks as if you're talking about someone who's a father to the entire community. So we will all, inshallah, keep in our prayers, keep your family in our prayers, and thank you Allah for those very heartfelt prayers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you also to all the people, as Brother Mahdi that recited as part of this program and volunteered their time. And with that, we thank all the participants that came and listened this evening. And inshallah, that will, inshallah, maybe Sheikh, you can end with like a short ziyarah.
Okay, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum ya Nabi Allah. Assalamu alaikum ya Rasul Allah. Assalamu alaikum ya Habib Allah. Assalamu alaikum ya Sahib Safinat al-Najah wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum ya Bid'ati Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum ya Fatima al-Zahra Sayyidati Nisa al-Alamin wa Qurrat Ayn al-Rasul wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum ya Amir al-Mu'minin wa Ya'sub al-Din Ali ibn Abi Talib wa Wasi Rasulillah wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. السلام عليكم أيها الحسن والحسين سبتي نبي الرحمة وسيدي شباب أهل الجنة أجمعين ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم أئمة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا صاحب العصر والزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك وجعل الله من أعوانك وانصارك والمستشهدين بين يديك وتحت لوائك. السلام عليكم يا أهل بيت النبوة وموضع الرسالة جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Inshallah, that concludes the program for tonight. For those of you that are from the community, inshallah, if you'd like to reach out to Brother Reza and or Sister Mahmoud Vaez, please feel free to do so. Other than that, inshallah, have a good rest of the